Just about 6:30, and it's Wednesday, January 19th, and we're at our first special webinar of the year, and we have David McKnight with us, coming straight from Puerto Rico, where it's nice and warm. You want to say hello, Dave?
Hey, everyone.
So people are just going to start. We're going to have a full house tonight, and people are just starting to come in, but it's probably about 85 where Dave is, and it's about 10 in Pennsylvania, so I'm a little jealous. But good for you and your family. So we've got a lot to talk about tonight. It's going to be, I'm really excited. You know, I was amazed when I saw that we haven't had David with us for a year, and we can't let that happen again, because this is so much fun, and it's also so informative. And I'm going to talk about not only David's books and give him a chance to talk about his books, but if you're a student of, you know, a strong retirement and training for retirement, and it really is about training your mind about this mindset, you have to listen to David's podcast. So it's the Power of Xero podcast. I listen to them. I tend to listen to them in bunches. Like David, I listened to, I know you had a new one come out today, but I just listened to your prior three. And they're just fantastic. And from somebody who's been doing this for 21 years now, and you know, I think I'm pretty well educated in this field. There's always something that I pick up or something that I get excited about or reminded about. So use that resource. It's out there, and you know, the cost is really reasonable, right? Because it doesn't cost you a thing to listen to the podcast. So it's kind of nice. So let me officially give you our introduction, and just remind everybody that this webinar is going to be recorded. The attendees are muted. Hopefully you can hear Dave and I. Just everybody raise your hand if you can hear me okay, or some people raise your hand if you can hear me okay. I think I see some hands raised there. Thank you, everyone. And so you're muted on your end. You are recorded. Chat should be disabled, but there is a Q&A at the bottom of the screen there, and you can type in questions as we go. We've received one or two before the webinar tonight, but you can type in your question as you go, and we'll pop in every now and then and answer questions. I'll monitor it. I think Dave might be able to see the questions too. But don't wait till the end, because you're going to forget. And if we answer your question, just send us another message and say, I got it answered. David, I don't know who's going to join tonight, but we've got a couple really well-educated finance people who join our webinar every week. So we might get some challenging questions, and that's always good. So just to remind everybody, we do have a weekly webinar that we do, not Dave and I, but that I do. So every Tuesday at 10 a.m. we have a webinar. I know you get invitations for it. So join us anytime. There's also no cost to that at all. And then we have special webinars like this periodically. Usually the last Wednesday of the month, we'll have a special webinar starting at 6:30. We've got some great ones coming up. Don Graves, who handles reverse mortgages. That's always a great presentation and wonderful information. We've got, we'll have a couple representatives from the slot group joining us throughout the year. And we have Brian Adler, who's an attorney that many of you have seen before, and some other experts that help us out. I'm very excited to tell you that David is joining us live here in the Newtown area on April 27th. So details to follow, but you folks will have a special opportunity as well. So we're going to have the regular event probably between 6:30 and say 7:30, 8 o'clock. But for you folks that are always on our webinars, our clients, of course, and if you're in this broadcast area right now and you receive our emails, you're going to have an opportunity to be part of the VIP event before that. So that's very, very exciting. So let me, I already talked about Dave's podcast. Oh, I want to tell you this. So at the end of this webinar, you're going to have an opportunity to schedule time with me. And this is why this is important. I've set aside 4 days, the next 4 days in my calendar, excluding Monday, just for you. So nobody else can book time in there, just for you folks on this webinar. That's going to be an opportunity to take 50 minutes with me to answer questions that will come up from this webinar tonight, because you're going to have questions that apply to you. And even if we were in a live class, we couldn't answer all the questions. And today, typing it in, we're not going to be able to answer your questions, but I'll give you that time. If it makes sense, I'll also do a before and after comparison for you that shows what your life will look like if you just continue this taxable, tax deferred paradigm, or if you're tax efficient. And it's often life changing. I don't think I'm being dramatic when I say that, Dave. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, particularly when we show the projection of what happens to your assets if tax rates double, which a lot of third-party experts are predicting could happen within the next 10 years. Plot spoiler on that projection that Mark's talking about, your money is going to run out 10 to 12 years faster than you ever thought possible. So those before and afters are always very illuminating, because it gives you a sense for, hey, when's your money going to run out? If you keep on doing what you're doing, tax rates stay where they are. When's your money going to run out if tax rates double? And then how much longer will your money last if you can get at or near the 0% tax bracket in retirement? And that's, if you can spend an extra $1.5 million along the way just by repositioning assets into more tax efficient areas, then I think that's something worth looking into.
Yeah, absolutely. And it often is millions of dollars difference. It's astonishing. I'm always just surprised. So let me, I'm going to read you Dave's bio, because it's very impressive and I don't want to miss anything. So as a formal introduction, let me read you Dave's bio. So David McKnight graduated from Brigham Young University with honors in 1997. He likes to show off his age there, that he's still very, very young by always listing 1997. Over the past 22 years, David has helped put thousands of Americans on the road to the 0% tax bracket. He has made frequent appearances in Forbes, USA Today, New York Times, Fox Business, CBS Radio, Bloomberg Radio, Huffington Post, Reuters, CNBC, Yahoo Finance, NASDAQ.com, Investors Business Daily, Kiplinger's Market Watch, and numerous other national publications. His best-selling book, The Power of Xero, has sold over 300,000 copies, and the updated and revised version was published by Penguin Random House. When it was launched in September of 2018, it finished the week as the #2 most sold business book in the world. For 2 consecutive years, Forbes magazine has ranked The Power of Xero as a top 10 financial resource in the country. The book was recently made into a full-length documentary film entitled The Power of Xero, The Tax Train is Coming. When his follow-up book, Tax-Free Income for Life, launched in November 2020, it finished the week as the #3 top-selling business book in the world. David and his wife, Felice, have 7 children. So congratulations for all of that, David. So welcome.
Yeah, the most impressive thing is that I'm doing the precise opposite of what Elon Musk warned about, which is that civilization is going to collapse because there's not enough people on the planet. So I'm doing everything I can to keep Elon Musk happy.
Let's keep him happy. I'm a big fan. That is not a recommendation to buy or sell any position. But yeah, I'm a big fan.
Or to have more children.
Yeah, or to have more children. That's right. Well, good for you. Well, we've talked about this before, and everybody on this webinar has probably heard me say it, but I'm the youngest of 13, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I forget about it until you remind me, and then I realize, yes, you've told me that several times now.
Yeah. So, and there's nothing better than a big family, right? It's really wonderful. So I appreciate it. Unfortunately, I'm the youngest, and we've lost some of my siblings, but it's really, really wonderful to come from a big family. So Dave, we've got a lot to talk about. One of the first things that we have listed in the questions is really what's changed since COVID-19 began. So we were all humming along nicely, in the beginning of 2020, and then the whole world changed. So really, in your opinion, what's changed so much?
Well, a couple of things have changed. We know COVID blew a $6 trillion hole in the economy. And so to build a bridge across that $6 trillion abyss in the economy, they had to print a lot of money. They had to borrow a lot of money. So we know that I was actually watching usdebtclock.org. And I was just, normally it takes about $1 trillion to be added it takes a year to add $1 trillion to the debt. We added $6 trillion to the debt in just a matter of months. So in what normally takes 6 years happened in about 3 months. I've never seen anything like it in our lives. So what does that really mean? We know that historically we've been told that Social Security sort of runs out of money in 2035. The new estimates are now that it runs out of money in 2032. Medicare, we've been told would run out of money in 2026. We're now being told it'll run out of money in 2023. So really, COVID-19 has just accelerated all of these, all of these events that we've long warned about, namely that our company faces a day of reckoning where these unfunded obligations, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the national debt, these 4 expenses are going to cost more and more and more as time wears on. And we've got a couple of things we can do. We can either cut expenses, we can raise revenue, or some combination of the two. I imagine that that's how it's going to play out over the course of the next 10 years. It's awfully hard to, if you're a politician, to cut Social Security and Medicare when baby boomers represent the single largest voting bloc in the country. So I imagine rather than cutting these programs down to size, we're going to face more taxes. We can't just print money. We're in the midst of an inflation wave that's not transitory. So I think that all of these different things that have happened over the course of the last 2 years are pointing towards higher taxes. So the message that I've been preaching for the last 10, 15 years has only intensified based on what's transpired over the last 24 months or so.
Yeah, boy, isn't that true? There have been 2 really strong turning points in my career. And the first one was in 2011. I had just completed my certified financial planner exam and been awarded my designation. And I attended a continuing education done by a fellow named Ed Slott. Now, Dave, I know you know Ed Slott. He wrote a piece in his book, in your book, an introduction, I believe it was. That was for the Power of Xero, right? Yeah.
Right.
And I remember sitting in the back of this continuing education in 2011 thinking, I thought I knew everything walking into this room, and I realized what I don't know. So since then, I've been part of Ed's Master Lead Advisor Group since 2011, and Ed's been a mentor of mine. And then the second big turning point was at an Ed Slott conference in San Diego, California. I came back to my seat, and there was a book in front of me called The Power of Xero. And I actually snagged one next to me because the seat was empty, and I brought one home to my partner at the time. But David stood up in front of us, about an audience about 400 people, and did his Power of Xero presentation. And it was another blown away moment because, again, I just thought, well, this is a really great way of bringing this important message to you folks who need to hear it. And it was just, again, just an awakening. So I appreciate that, Dave. And that was, I think, 2015. Does that sound right? Mm-hmm. And since then, you've gifted me the opportunity to meet hundreds of people. And it's so important because everything you just said is very true. We all know that taxes have to increase. There's still people that have to be convinced of that. But, the studies that we've done, that my study group, show that the average middle-class American will be in the 40 to 45% effective tax rate, I think, within the next 10 years. And if you don't believe that, and if you don't believe the government is motivated to go after your tax dollars or to start drawing more money out of your bank accounts, just look at what happened in 2020 here, or 2022 here, with Medicare costs. So your Medicare costs increased, I think it was 43%. I'm kind of working off of memory here, but that is they didn't increase payroll tax. They didn't, that's another phantom tax. It wasn't, some kind of soft tax to only the rich. This was a direct pull out of the bank accounts for some people who just can't afford it. So the government they're trying to do everything that they can to access additional dollars. And, they started with Medicare, and that surprised me. Do you have any comments about that?
Let me talk real quick on who's going to bear the brunt. I'm glad you brought it to everyone's attention. Who's going to bear the brunt of all the taxes? And a lot of people think they're just going to raise taxes on the 1%. I know Joe Biden, with his Build Back Better plan, talked about only those who made more than $450,000 would bear the brunt of all of the new expenditures over the arc of the next 10 years. Well, there's a lady by the name of Maya McGinnis, who's the president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. It's a bipartisan think tank out of Washington, D.C. And they actually did a study and said, okay, what if all they did was tax every dollar above $400,000? How high would the tax have to go just to prevent the national debt from growing by more than $1 trillion per year? This is not to get us down to even. This is not to spend the debt down, just to prevent the debt from growing by more than $1 trillion per year. You know, they realized they'd have to tax every dollar above $400,000 earned above $400,000 at 103%. So they said, whoa, that's not very practical. So let's lower that number down to, say, $250,000. They lowered that down to $250,000. Every dollar earned above $250,000 would have to be taxed at 80% just to prevent the national debt from growing by more than $1 trillion per year. So they said that's not practical either. So they kept lowering and lowering and lowering that threshold to the point where basically what you just said, Mark, is totally true, that we would have to have an effective tax rate on every dollar made above $50,000 of basically 40%. It's an effective tax rate of 40%. So for people who think that the rich are going to bail us out, it's just mathematically not viable. Okay, so eventually the federal government's going to have to broaden the tax base. Everybody's going to fall under the IRS's scope sooner or later, because there's just, the rich people don't have enough money to pay for everything that the federal government's promised that they can't afford to deliver. And so that's why we approach this message with such urgency, because the math is not on our side.
Yeah, and what we saw and what came out of the House Ways and Means Committee, and I guess out of Congress too, was when the Build Back Better, it's hard to say, isn't it? Build Back Better plan was also for the first time just a tax on an asset, not even just a distribution, because they had that forced, really required minimum distribution. I think it was anything over $10 million in any type of retirement account would have to be distributed. 50% of the overage amount would have to be distributed and then taxed. So that's another way that you're completely out of control of what you're doing with your money. Really challenging. So when you hear things like that, David, I mean, really and you do, you know, this is your study, and I talk about your podcast and all the great information that you bring. And often that's, you know, that's like additional education for us and really keeping us sharp. And one of the things I really like, by the way, about doing a weekly podcast and doing these special a weekly webinar and doing these monthly webinars, the special webinars, is I have to stay on top of my game as well, right? There's a lot of prep. You spend hours prepping these things, and that's good. So with all this information you've gleaned, I mean, what should folks be doing right now, knowing that they're going to be in that scope, they're going to be in that area? Really, what should they be doing?
Well, so for a long time, I thought that Joe Biden was going to get his Build Back Better through. I thought that Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema would eventually sort of come over to his way of thinking. And really what I predicted happening was that, yes, he would raise taxes on the wealthy, but he would also extend the Trump tax cuts for middle-class Americans. And I fully expected him to do that, to extend it under budget reconciliation. He would extend it for another 8 years. So what that means is that instead of having that tax cut expire in 2026, it would go all the way through 2029. So it would start in 2022, 2023, 2024, all the way through 2029. They would revert back to 2017 tax rates in 2030. So I was fully anticipating, starting in 2022, an 8-year extension of the Trump tax cuts for middle-class America. And my most recent podcast that came out today talks about how many people thought that once Manchin gave a firm no on Joe Biden's Build Back Better, that they would come back to the table and try to negotiate. They had a series of negotiations, and then Joe Manchin came back to the table a second time, and he says, it's definitely off. Nothing is happening with this bill. And so I think people have completely written off the Build Back Better. And when you write off the Build Back Better, you also write out the possibility that Biden would extend those tax cuts for middle-class America. So overnight, we went from the hope of having 8 years of historically low tax rates for middle-class America to now these Trump tax cuts for middle-class America are going to revert back to what they were in 2017, starting on January 1st, 2026. So instead of an 8-year window of opportunity within which to get your highly taxable 401ks and IRAs repositioned to tax-free by way of, say, a Roth conversion, for example, you now have 4 years, okay? 4 years of historically low tax rates, which means that somewhat increases the likelihood of bumping up into a higher tax bracket during that 4-year period. And in a perfect world, we would stretch that tax obligation out over a longer period, as long a period as possible. Now we're looking at 4 years. And so what I would tell people is that instead of saying, okay, we only have 4 years, now I'm going to bump up into the 32% tax bracket, I'd say get potentially as much as you can shifted in that 24% tax bracket if you feel comfortable with it. And then starting in 2026, you'll be faced with some, potentially, 25 or 28% taxes if you have to extend that shift out through 2026, 2027, 2028. But I would encourage people to look at taking advantage of these historically low taxes, but don't succumb to the temptation to bump up into the 32% tax bracket, because frankly, I don't think that's a good deal. You're better off paying those 25 or 28% tax bracket rates starting in 2026, 2027. But be thinking that even when 2026 rolls around, 25 and 28 is still not a bad tax rate, considering where tax rates will likely be in 2030 and beyond.
Yeah, it's that extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act always concerned me. It was great for our clients, right? Gives us more time, gets things done, but horrible for the economy or the strength of our country. So it's funny because you have a mixed feeling about that. Again, when I remember you talking about that several months ago, and I think you said that Ed didn't necessarily agree. Ed Slott didn't necessarily agree that was going to happen. And you just don't know what's going to happen in Washington. But so it really is a mixed bag. Now, I'll say that I don't necessarily agree with you, Dave, about going into the 32% bracket. There are times when it can make sense. I like to look at the effective tax rate, right? So if you're slightly into it, especially single folks, if you have a single individual that comes to you with millions of dollars, boy, is it tough. You're really up against it. And you're right. We were doing Roth conversions in 2017, 2016, 2015. I started doing it all the way back in 2011, as I told you. So it's definitely more challenging, but you can get it done. My concern is that it's going to get a little worse before the end of 2026. It still could go there.
Yeah, that's possible. Working, all other things being equal, I guess what I'm trying to say is, if we know, for example, that the 25 and the 28% tax bracket will be around in 2026, 2027, you're better off extending that shifting period slightly beyond 2026 than sort of reflexively bumping up into that 32% tax bracket in the meantime. I tend to think that the tax rates go up gradually, but some people are saying that Republicans could get control of everything in 2024, in which case they could extend the Trump tax cuts for another 8 years. The problem that everybody has to remember is that there's always a day of reckoning. When we lower tax rates in the face of exploding debt, we're simply kicking the can down the road. And the fix on the back end is going to be even more severe, even more draconian. Tax rates are going to have to rise even higher on the back end to compensate for all of the tax cuts that, mathematically speaking, were not good for our country in the short term. And so it's that old whipsaw. You can pay me now or pay me later with interest. And what politicians love to cut taxes in the short term because it wins them votes, but the national debt keeps growing and spiraling out of control, and somebody's going to have to pay that money sooner or later. We can't just print money to service that debt, because that has implications of its own. So every year that the debt goes up means the likelihood of higher taxes is more and more real.
Yeah, one thing I want to talk about is you discussed this on one of your podcasts, and I talked about it on a webinar. Is everybody's talking about inflation right now, and the Fed has tools to help fight inflation, right? By raising interest rates. That's one of the things that the Fed is required to do is manage, economic growth and inflation. And the way they manage inflation is raising interest rates. So that's the Fed funds rate. That doesn't necessarily mean the market, right? What the market rates are. But you posited this, and I picked up on that as well. Can the Fed really aggressively raise interest rates because of the service of our national debt? So can you talk about that a little bit, Dave?
Yeah, so you're exactly right, Mark. One of the tools they have in their tool bag, as it were, to fight inflation is to raise interest rates. The problem is the reason we're able to sustain all of this debt for such a long period of time is because we've been at historically low interest rates for so long. And so the cost of servicing all this debt today is about the same as what it cost back in 2003, when we only had about $5 trillion of debt. Back then, interest rates were at about 5.5%. Today, they're much lower, about 2%. It's about a third as much. And so what's happening is, and when I say 2%, I'm talking about with all the different spreads in there. So what's happening is, if we get to the point where they raise interest rates in an attempt to sort of mitigate inflation, then the thing that they rub up against is that the cost of servicing the national debt could triple or even quadruple. And when that happens, we'll get to a point where the cost of servicing the national debt consumes the entire federal budget. There won't be anything left to pay for the Smithsonian or national parks or food stamps or Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or any of the other things that the federal government has to pay for year in and year out. Literally, the national debt. And by the way, there's only two things that the Constitution says that the federal government is required to pay. One is Civil War pensions. I think we're out of the woods on that one. But the second one is interest on the national debt. We're constitutionally required to pay that. And so we're going to have to find a way to do that. And how do we do that? We have to raise more revenue. How do you raise more revenue? You raise more taxes.
Yeah, it's that one item concerns me the most right now, with the in totality with where we are with the markets and inflation, because inflation's at 7% year over year. As you said, it's the Fed chairman came out and Janet Yellen came out and said it's not transitory. Which means it's going to be here for a while. I read a lot of analyst reports. Even one of the most, I don't know how you want to say it, bullish or most conservative as far as inflation, says that they expect inflation to wane by the end of this year to about 2.5%, and then return to 3.5% to 4.5% for the next several years. Well, 3.5% and 4.5% or 5% inflation, you start seeing financial plans fail, right? So if we take away the tool out of the toolbox of raising interest rates to help dampen down inflation, just because we can't afford the note, because that's what it comes to. It's just like having a variable rate mortgage, and now you can't pay your mortgage, right? And you got to get out of your house, except we can't abandon the house as a government. So that's what concerns me when you're talking about the health of financial plans and investing for clients. They're the things that keep me up at night.
Yeah, and by the way, when the Fed projects these, what inflation will be, there wasn't anybody a year ago that was projecting 7% inflation. So they try to peg inflation at 2%. They try to manipulate interest rates so that inflation comes in at 2% per year. That's exactly what they did last year. They had no idea that inflation was going to be 7%. They didn't have the means of predicting that. And so just because they're predicting it's going to be at 3.5% or 4% doesn't mean anything. It's just a prediction. And it could just as easily fail as their 2% inflation prediction failed from a year ago. And so if we continue to see the printing of money to try to solve our economic problems, if we continue to see debt spiral out of control, all of these things can lead to higher inflation. And it's not transitory.
That's right. That's right. So we did a poll. So David and I, when we were preparing for you folks, we did a poll. So I want to launch that poll and just take a little break in the conversation. And the question is, what are your biggest worries in retirement? So it's multiple choice. I believe you can choose more than one, but I'm going to launch this and we'll see how it goes. And I'll read it to you. So the first answer is, and Dave, I don't know, can you see the poll?
Yep.
Okay. So the first answer is your largest concern is running out or not having enough money. The second is losing money in the markets, right? Broad markets, whatever you call the markets, needing long-term care in the future, higher taxes. We've been talking a lot about taxes, high inflation, all the above, or I'm not worried at all. I've got it covered. So there's always one or two wise guys out there that say, I'm not worried at all. I've got it covered, right? But just want to kind of take a pulse of where you are. So it's always interesting to see these things come in, Can you see the results, Dave?
Mm-mm.
No. Okay. All right. So no one has chosen, I'm not worried at all. I've got it covered. That's surprising. And maybe that's why you're on this webinar tonight. 45% are saying all the above, and higher taxes is the next highest. That's also 45%. And then the others are about balanced there. So really interesting. I'm going to end the poll in a moment. We have a 76% participation rate. That's great. Thank you, everybody. So all the above and higher taxes win that race. No surprise. I wonder what it would have been if we did this during the open. We've been talking about higher taxes. And one of the things I got to say, if I can just harken back to something we were talking about all the reasons the government has to raise taxes, I think about, and I'm not sure if he's on the webinar tonight, but I'm thinking about one person in particular who attended one of the Changing World of Retirement classes via webinar, which I have coming up in March. You'll get an invitation. You folks will get an invitation to that. We had a lot of discussion about, he's done very well for himself, several $1 million. We had a lot of discussion about higher taxes. Well, I don't know if taxes are really going to increase. How are they going to do that? And his wife suddenly passed away. Young family, right? This is not somebody in their 80s, 90s. This is a young family. Yeah, I think young, right? So just a little bit older than me. So I think it's young, not yet retired. Well, unfortunately, when that happens, there's a lot of things that happen when a spouse passes away. But one thing that happens for sure, your tax rates go up. Because what happens is, if it's the husband who passes away, or the breadwinner who passes away, whether it's the husband or wife, and it's usually one spouse has more money than the other. In the IRAs, the spouse inherits that money, and those required minimum distributions kick in now at age 72, and that money still has to come out. It's still the same. It's still that large amount, but now you're paying as a single filer. And if you don't know what those rates are, I invite you to go to my website, attleburowealth.com. And I have a section in there. And if we have time at the end, I'll show you. It has the slot corner on it. If you click in that slot corner, I've got all the tax charts, Medicare planning charts, retirement plan contribution levels, the RMD, life expectancy chart. I have all that there that you can download. It's still 2021, and it'll continue to be 2021 probably until the end of January. So you can do your tax planning for last year. or your tax preparation for last year. But take a look at that and see the difference between married filing jointly and single filers. So listen, when I retire, I'm certain that my wife and I are going to go at the same time. Dave, you're going to, that's just how it happens, right? So you have to be prepared for that. So even if you don't believe that, taxes are going to raise for all the reasons Dave and I have talked about, pay attention to that. At some point you're going to be suddenly single. So we've got a couple of questions. Do you mind if I take some questions now, Dave?
Go for it.
All right. This is Roseanne. How you doing, Roseanne? So this is one we always hear. Moving forward, do you think the federal government will at some point tax Roth withdrawals? She put. So are they going to eventually tax the Roth IRA as well?
Yeah, you got to remember that there aren't very many things in the world that the government likes and members of the general public like, and Roth IRAs is one of them. Why is that the case? Well, the federal government loves Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, Roth conversions, because it brings them more revenue today. Well, we as investors and pre-retirees and retirees love it because we can sort of see that tax freight train off in the distance. We can see that it's bearing down on us. We can see that every year that train picks up a little bit more speed. And so we want to shield ourselves from the impact of higher taxes, and Roth IRAs and Roth 401ks and Roth conversions are the way that we do it. So there aren't very many things in the world that the government likes and that we like. And so I don't see anything happening with the Roth IRA anytime soon. And of course, if they started taxing distributions on Roth IRAs, people would stop doing Roth IRAs altogether, and the federal government, frankly, would lose that source of revenue.
Yeah, and don't you think that? So I always think of the importance of getting this set up now because of the grandfathering, right? So if they change something, it's like they may force money out of the Roth IRA, kind of like they do with required minimum distributions for beneficiaries. And what they're talking about now, where if you have more than $10 million in a Roth IRA, now this isn't the law now, this was just what was proposed, but if you had more than $10 million in a Roth IRA, then you would have to take a distribution of 50% of that overage, and you'd have to do that every year, right? But that's a way to pull money back, kind of put it back in taxable circulation. That's possible, but still, it's very unlikely, in my opinion, unless you're going to hit that, you're talking about those larger numbers in Roth IRAs. Let's face it, not a lot of people have $10 million in a Roth IRA, right? And it really came on the back of that $5 billion Roth IRA that the fellow, I forget his name, but the fellow
Peter Thiel, yeah,
that's a total one-off. I mean, so really unfortunate. All right, I've got a question here. The person asks, is it better to sell a property that has gone up in value from 100,000 to 300,000 now, or wait until when the tax rate is lower? So I'll take that one if you don't mind, Dave.
Go for it.
It's going to depend on what your situation is. First of all, I don't know when taxes are ever going to be lower, but unless your specific circumstance says, I make $400,000 at my job and I'm retiring next year and I'm going to have a lull in income, and suddenly your income's going to drop to $25,000 a year. So that's a very specialized thing. The other thing is when you're talking about selling a property, so I'm hearing real estate or some other kind of hard asset, you may have embedded gains or something like that, embedded losses or something like that in your tax history that you can use to offset those, or you may have a loss in another area. So that's a really good question that you can flesh out in a financial planning session. And let me take a second to talk about your team here while we're in here. You've all heard me say this. You need to have your team. You need to have a qualified certified financial planner. I think if you're working with a financial advisor, he or she should be a certified financial planner. I also think that if you're anywhere near retirement, that person should be involved in Dave's group, Ed Slott's Master Elite Advisor group, because there's only 400 of us in Ed's group in the entire country And we, it's the education, it's the time, it's the commitment to learn the things that are important to you. You're also going to need a really good CPA, and a CPA who understands it and who gets it, right? Who understands tax efficiency and tax planning, not just being reactive to, did I pay less or more in taxes this past year? You're going to need at least one attorney. You're going to need a good estate attorney. If you are close to 60 years old, or if you have parents who are still alive, you should have an elder law attorney, and usually they could be the same people. A good elder law and estate attorney, just make sure that they truly are educated in elder law. And then you may need other attorneys. If you have real estate properties, you may need a real estate attorney. You may need a business attorney. So that's the team that you want working with you. Yes, there's fees involved in each one of those people in that group. But when we talk about saving people millions of dollars by doing things a little differently, not taking more risk in the portfolio, not spending less money, not doing the things that they want to do, but just doing things a little bit differently and changing their lives by having millions of dollars and years left of their money, there's not a fee that you could pay us that would match that, right? And having the comfort in those experts in your team all working together for you is vitally important. So I don't have a name in this. This was anonymous, but great question. I'm going to ask Gerard. Gerard's one of our financial experts who's often on our webinar. So Gerard asked, how does means testing enter into the conversation regarding taxes and Social Security future benefits? You want to take that, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, Social Security is not the big issue in my mind. It's Medicare. Medicare is 5 times more expensive, and that's really what's going to be driving most of the debt over time. If all Congress does is nothing, the national debt will, by definition, grow, just because more and more Americans will move on to the roles of, Social Security, Medicare, but Medicare is the big beast, right? Social Security is a relatively easy fix. You can move, you can move back the retirement age, the first year at which you can withdraw benefits for young people like me and Mark. That's a relatively easy fix. Means testing could certainly enter into the equation like it does in other countries. So it's going to be probably a combination of means testing on younger folks like Mark and I, or moving the age at which you qualify for Social Security back until, say, age 72. I mean, if you look back at when you could draw Social Security back in 1935, when Social Security first rolled out, it was age 65, back when the average life expectancy was 62. Now the average life expectancy is 77 for men, 79 for women. And when can you draw Social Security? Well, it's age 62. And so they haven't really adjusted that in almost 100 years. And so I see that being a natural, a natural evolution. But it doesn't really, it's like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. It doesn't really solve the problem. They're going to have to figure out how to negotiate Medicare. That is the thing that increases by 6% per year on average over time. And we got 10,000 baby boomers per day that move out of the workforce onto the roles of Social Security and ultimately Medicare. Medicare is such an expensive animal that it will be sort of controlling the destiny of our country. And so I worry less about what's going to happen to Social Security and more about how we're going to afford to pay for Medicare over time.
Yeah, good answer, Dave. You're spot on there. All right, Diane asks, I was told by my accountant that the amount you can put in a Roth IRA in 2022 and annually is going to be limited. Is this true? Well, Diane, it is limited. And it's also, that's means tested as far as how much you can contribute based on your earnings. So you can pull, again, Diane, if you go to the our website, attleborwealth.com, and go into that slot corner, and you can see exactly how much you can contribute to a Roth IRA. Now, if you're talking about conversions, and that's often confused, then there's no limit on conversions right now. There's discussion about that, but you can convert as little or as much as you'd like. I hope that answers your question. So I'm going to give you this because this is from a client of ours. So I'm sure he wants to hear from you because he's heard from me a lot, Dave. So any thoughts on where capital gains are heading? No doubt they will increase, but what is the general consensus out there?
It almost depends entirely on who's in office. If you have Democrats that control the presidency, the House, and the Senate, they're almost certainly going to try to raise them. Republicans tend to feel like high capital gains taxes stymie the growth of the economy, and so they're more reticent to make that type of a move, even in the face of spiraling, the spiraling debt crisis. So sadly, it has less to do with math and more to do with who's in office. It's looking like come midterms that Republicans are there's going to be a sort of this red wave that rolls through the House and through Senate, which means that Biden's going to be sort of a lame duck for the last 2 years of his first term. And then we'll see what happens in 2024. So it's tough to say, but I wish that these things were more tied to the actual fiscal trajectory of our country and less tied to political majorities in the House and Senate. But that's the reality that we're facing, and the reason why we have $30 trillion of debt is because politicians are more concerned about getting reelected than they are about what the debt's going to be 2 years from now, when they're not even sure if they're going to be in office at that point. So, but if you look purely at the math of it all, capital gains taxes were going to have to rise precipitously, or along with individual income tax rates, or we're going to go broke as a country.
Yeah, and I know you talk about that a lot in all your books, Dave. Look Before You Learn talks a lot about the vehicle that people can use to invest in that avoid capital gains tax, because that's a runaway freight train as well. When I was brought up in working at UBS and Wachovia, which became Wells Fargo, I was taught that whole life and permanent insurance was bad, right? Vest it, or buy term and invest the rest. Another awakening I had was learning from Ed and learning from you about really the value of permanent insurance and using that tax-free nature of life insurance for those vehicles. So I'm not here trying to sell anybody on life insurance, but you take away that risk, right? That tax rate, that increased tax rate risk by using a vehicle like that. And you say it all the time, David, in your book and everywhere else. There's only 2 things that are truly tax-free, and that's Roth IRA and the life insurance. I call them cash value life insurance. You call them life insurance retirement plans. But someone asked about the Roth IRA, and will that ever go away? And we know that there are limits on what we can contribute to our Roth IRAs or 401ks. There are no limits on conversions right now, so we can move a lot of IRA money, and we talk about how to stack it up in our marginal tax rates and kind of have a strategic plan to move that over. But what about that taxable money? If I have $1 million to whatever sitting in that taxable bucket, is there anything other than that life insurance that will give us the protection that we need from the tax rates?
Well, there's, I always tell people you don't have to love life insurance. You don't have to love life insurance companies. You just have to like them a little bit more than you like the IRS, because in the end, someone's going to get your money. So, people that have these inherent prejudices against life insurance, I say, all right, well, your capital gains are going to be taxed at your highest marginal, if they're short-term capital gains, they'll be taxed at your highest marginal tax rate. Right on top of all your other income, which means that if your money grew at 8%, it's going to feel like it only grew at 5%. So that 3% that goes to pay for taxes over time, that's going to be a drag. There's going to be an opportunity cost associated with that. And so the average expenses per year over the life of a cash value life insurance policy are between 1% and 1.5%, which is not all that different than what you're paying in say a 401k or a brokerage account or what have you. And so, I tell people, whatever road you take in life, somebody's making 1 to 1.5% off of your money. The question is, what are you getting in exchange for that 1 to 1.5%? And with the life insurance, I really like to note that you are getting a death benefit in exchange for those fees that you are paying, and that death benefit doubles as long-term care. And I tell people all the time, people aren't opposed to having long-term care insurance, they're just opposed to paying for it. So if you just simply take dollars that would have otherwise been subject to the 1 to 1.5% fee that you might pay to your 401k provider or maybe to a money manager, and you shift a portion of that money into what I call a life insurance retirement plan. It's essentially a bucket of money with a spigot attached to the side of it. And the cost of those expenses on average per year over the life of the program are going to be 1 to 1.5%. You're actually getting something useful in exchange for that money. And it's, like I said, it's a death benefit that doubles as long-term care. And frankly, people there's a lot of heartburn associated with traditional long-term care insurance. And Mark, if you don't mind, I'm going to share a quick dialogue that I have with my own clients. And it goes something like this. I'll be sitting across the table from him. And I'll say, Mr. Jones, you know, I love you, right? And he'll say, yeah, Dave, I know you love me. And I'll say, I do love you, but you're better off dying than needing long-term care. He'll say, why is that? I'll say, well, at least if you died, Mrs. Jones here is beneficiary in all your accounts. And while we would miss you terribly, life for her is going to go along relatively unchanged. However, if you didn't die and ended up needing long-term care, you know, you almost died, then all of the money that she was planning on living on now gets earmarked for the long-term care facility. And she gets to keep what? One house, one car, a minimum monthly maintenance needs allowance, about $2,500 a month, and about $130,000 of cash. So what was shaping up to be a perfectly rosy retirement for Mrs. Jones turns into basic bare bones subsistence type living. And of course, the converse is true if Mrs. Jones ended up needing long-term care. And so this is a real issue, because you can burn through a lifetime of savings in 3 years or less if you end up needing long-term care. And so one of the benefits of the LIRP is instead of, you know, like traditional long-term care insurance where you pay for 30 years, die peaceful in your sleep, never having used it, and they don't send your money back at the end. The way the LIRP works is that should you die peaceful in your sleep 30 years from now, never having needed long-term care, someone's still getting a death benefit, probably your children. So there isn't that sensation of having paid for something without ever using it. By the way, all that cash value that builds along the way grows tax-free, grows safely and productively, and you get to withdraw it tax-free at a period in your life when tax rates are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today.
Yeah, they can work really brilliantly. And I'll tell you, you know, so we're because we do hear these things over our lifetimes. And I do tell folks, you know, I understand that we're telling you something completely different than what you've heard before. You know, pay your taxes now, when you still have accountants say, why would you pay taxes early, right? Pay them when you have to. Consider, and if it makes sense for you, right? And if you qualify for these life insurance retirement plans or cash value life insurance, where when I was brought up, it was buy term insurance, invest the rest. You know, there are still trainings out there with typical financial advisors that are just absolutely wrong. Just like the person before, when we were talking about, my accountant tells me that I don't remember who that was. I'm sorry, but my accountant says that there is a cap, you know, there's a limit on how much you can contribute to a Roth IRA. She clarified and said, no, I was talking about a conversion. So this person's accountant is saying there's a limit on the conversion. There's a lot of false information out there. We had an accountant call us one time and say, you moved $100,000 of my client's money into a Roth IRA via conversion. She could only do $7,000. Well, that was the contribution limit, right? There was confusion there. So that's why I go back to that. You have to have your good team. So we have 3 more questions here. I think we're good with time. Anonymous says, when I become 65, will I have to pay a monthly Medicare fee to the Social Security Administration? You want to take that, Dave, or do you want me to?
You can take it.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. So the answer is yes. So when you're 65 and you sign up for, if you have to sign up, or if you do sign up for Medicare, you're going to pay a fee to the for that Medicare, which is currently $170 and change. Once you start receiving Social Security, they take that fee right out of your Social Security. So that was an easy answer. Thank you, Anonymous. Keith asks, this one's more challenging. I think we'll have to, unless you know the answer, I'd have to come back to Keith on this one. I think I know the answer, but it's one of those things that it's here, and I want to make sure it's right. Can Roth IRA be moved into a special needs trust without being taxed as life insurance proceeds can? Now, I know that Roth IRAs can be sent to a special needs trust. What I'm not certain on is when the taxation is going to trigger. It's not uncommon for trusts to be named as beneficiaries in any type of IRA. It's been less common since the Secure Act. But Dave, do you have any comments on that?
Nope. I don't have I don't like you. I'm not as familiar with the special needs trust.
Yeah. So Keith, I'm happy to, if you email me that question, I'm happy to send that to the Slack group. We'll have a conversation about it and we'll get you an answer on that. Like I said, I think I know the answer to that, but I just want to clarify it. But good question. Now let me grab one. Can I ask another question or answer another question here, Dave? Is that okay with you? All right. Give me one sec. Oops, wrong button. All right, so we have kind of a two-part question that came in before, and I'll just read it to you here. It says, we're in our early 60s and have been fortunate to save several $1 million for our retirement years. Good for you. Unfortunately, 70% of it is in taxable accounts, 25% in tax-deferred accounts, and only 5% in tax-free accounts. So we have no chance to make it to the 0% tax bracket. I'm not sure about that, but we will still want to do what we can to reduce the tax bite over the next few decades. So 2 questions. So that's kind of the setup. Here's the 2 questions. We started doing annual Roth conversions, but only up to the income limit for the 24% bracket. Expecting that taxes will increase in 2026, should we move more into Roth IRAs over the next 4 years, even though we'd be paying taxes at 32%, or stick with moving the most we can up to the 24% bracket limit? So why don't we stop there and you can answer that. And we did talk about this.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about this already. I'm a fan of extending that Roth conversion period beyond 2026. I tend to think that in the medium term, that tax rates are going to stay relatively stable. Of course, I'm looking into my crystal ball. Everybody's crystal ball looks a little bit different. So I would much rather pay, the 24% tax rates up until 2026 and beyond, pay 25 and 28, as opposed to preemptively paying the 32. But again, this is a subjective type of a thing. It's what, how quickly do you think tax rates will go up? Ed Slott is just like, they're going to go up in 2022. And I'm like, I'm not so sure. I think that it's more of a gradual sort of a thing. And so that I would be more inclined to stretch that obligation out over a longer period of time. I would say definitely get it done before 2030, because there's going to be a perfect storm that hits our country in 2030. You definitely want to get all your heavy lifting done before 2030, because there's going to be some crazy stuff coming down in 2030 between demographics and debt and unfunded obligations. It's all going to hit in 2030. You want to get your house in order before then.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, and what I was talking about before about going into the 32% bracket, I'll tell you that is few and far between for us. What we see, and this may not be this person's situation, because they have what I would think is, and what I've experienced is probably more uncommon, right? 75% of their money in taxable, 70% in taxable, 25% in tax deferred. We tend to see a lot of people with most of their money in tax deferred, and sometimes it's significant. Sometimes it's $3, $4, $5 million. So there is just no way on earth that we can transfer that amount of money by 2026. So now we're seeing schedules going out to 2033, 2035. And like you just said, Dave, when we go out past 2029, 2030, that's where I start getting concerned. And I have a conversation with our clients that says, how aggressive do you want to be, right? What's your comfort level in going up a little higher? And where does your concern really lie? The future of a much higher tax rate, or paying that additional tax now? And I agree with you. I think it's going to be a more gradual slope, right? It won't be a rocket ship, but it's going to be pretty aggressive. So great answer. Thank you. The second part of this, just checking our time. If we were to put a significant chunk of money into a life insurance retirement plan to move that money from taxable to tax-free bucket, we had to pay significant capital gains. This goes back to that capital gains question we had before on the appreciation of taxable investments. And since those capital gains increase our AGI, adjusted gross income, it would limit or block doing Roth conversions without jumping to a higher tax bracket. Is the move to alert valuable enough to be worth paying capital gains taxes and reducing our Roth conversions in order to fund it? Do you want to take that, Dave, or you want me to?
Sure. So the first part of that's absolutely correct. Your capital gains do count towards your AGI. The second part, I think we should clarify, when you're doing the tax calculation, the first thing that is calculated is basically your ordinary income. So if you have any income that you earn that year, any sort of Roth conversions, those sort of go into your tax cylinder first. They don't, it's not like your capital gains go into your tax. So capital gains, even though ordinary income and capital gains go into the same adjusted gross income cylinder that determines whether you can do a Roth IRA, determines the rate at which deductions get phased out, so on and so forth. It does not, they don't go into the same cylinder for the calculation of those two respective taxes. So for example, your income and your Roth conversions go into your income tax cylinder, and it's not impacted by your capital gains. And so even if you had massive amounts of capital gains, because the calculation on your income and your Roth conversions is calculated first, it has no bearing. The capital gains calculus has no bearing on your Roth conversions. And so I wouldn't worry about that, because we're going to do that Roth conversion tax calculation first. And then that's going to, once we figure out what the AGI is there, then that's going to help determine, once we figure out what your income tax bracket is, that's going to help determine the rate at which your capital gains tax is paid. So the first part of that was right. The second part we just need to clarify, and it's hard to explain all of that without a whiteboard, but I hope I was able to clarify that a little bit.
Yeah, it is hard to explain it. And this is another time I've had discussions with experts about this who were just completely wrong about it. So capital gains affect your adjusted gross income, your modified adjusted gross income, and it affects, your IRMA, which is income related monthly adjustment amount, the extra amount you pay for Medicare. It affects tax credits, but the two are taxed completely differently, right? Talking about long-term capital gains. Now, it's still your tax bill, right? So if you have a $50,000 tax bill because of Roth conversions, and then you have a $100,000 tax bill because of capital gains, you still have to pay $150,000 in tax. So that may affect your comfort level, but they are completely different things. So Eric, if you want to discuss that more, you'll have an opportunity to schedule time with me and we can go over that. I've got a really great program that breaks it down for you. And I invested in that program solely for this reason, by the way, because this is not an uncommon discussion that we have. Okay. Michael, hey, Michael asks, could money from Roth IRA account be invested into precious metals, gold, silver, etc.? Another way of asking, could one convert Roth IRA into a gold Roth IRA like you can now with traditional IRA? Go ahead with that, Dave, if you want.
Yeah, I don't really have any precious metal, but yeah, my understanding is that you can. I don't know if you want to add any further light knowledge on that, Mark.
Yeah, anything you can invest in a traditional IRA, you can invest in a Roth IRA. There are some limitations and I would say, Michael, we could talk more about that if that's something that you're considering. There are some limitations on what you can invest in a Roth, any IRA, whether it's Roth or traditional, but you can invest in hard dollar assets. Diane asks, 100% of our retirement is tax deferred. We just did a Roth conversion in 2021 that pushed us into the 32% bracket. What we struggled with is the increased IRMA for Medicare. We went into a higher IRMA bracket. Was that a smart move? So Dave, if you want to start on that, I want to finish on that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things that might have touched a nerve for me. The first one is bouncing into the 32% tax bracket. We've already talked about whether that's something you should consider. The second thing that people do wince over is just that IRMA. And remember, there's an increase in IRMA for the husband and there's an increase in IRMA for the spouse, and that can really add up But it's sort of a trade-off. You have to say, okay, I am paying my IRMA, an increased IRMA in the short term to spare my IRAs and my Social Security from higher taxation over the long term. Remember, if you leave your money in your IRAs, any required minimum distributions are going to count as provisional income and dramatically increase the likelihood that you pay Social Security taxation in perpetuity. So if you can get to the 0% tax bracket in retirement by shifting most of your assets to tax-free, you put yourself in a position where not only will you not pay IRMA anymore, but you won't pay Social Security tax anymore, and you will shield yourself from the impact of tax rate risk down the road. So yeah, it hurts a little bit in the short term, but there's a triple benefit in the long term: no Social Security tax, no IRMA, and shielding yourself from higher tax rates down the road.
Yeah, you're right, Dave, and just IRMA alone. So all those other things count 100%. But we've done this. We have a spreadsheet we use, comparison, because what happens, Diane, is if you keep your money into your traditional IRAs, you're going to be triggering that IRMA anyway, and it's just going to grow and grow and grow. So we take a spreadsheet and we say, okay, what if we do Roth conversions, and we're doing IRMA for the next 5 years or 7 years, right? There's that 2-year overhang. There's a 2-year look back on it. Or IRMA doesn't kick in until year 9, let's just say, for example, and now you pay that forever. And by the way, that's under today's rules. You're subject to the increases that we just don't know about, the big question mark. I have to tell you, I've ran these, I can't tell you how many times. I've never seen it where it doesn't work out better to pay the IRMA now, just like to do the Roth conversions now, to pay the tax now. Because first of all, we know what the cost is, right? So known cost has a tremendous value. But even so, and often it's $85,000, $100,000 difference in doing the IRMA now. So while it may make you uncomfortable, it's worth the exercise of showing that side-by-side comparison on that. And listen, folks, these comparisons that you do or that we do for folks, they have to be done all the time. It's important. We do it at first to educate you, show, but when we're doing our annual financial planning for clients, it's often a re-education, because you've had 40 plus years of tax deferred investing is the way to go. Don't pay your tax until you have to, all these. And so we have to show, and we do every year, the value of these things. And that's important. So you've got to review your plan every year, and you've got to just get in the right mindset every year. It's really easy to get back in those comfortable ways. And then you're reacting to everything and things you can no longer control. You can control it now. Dave, I want to talk about your books and give you an opportunity to talk about your new book, because it sounds really exciting. Would you mind? I've referred to this section of my website, and I just want to show people where to access that real quick. And then we're going to log out of here in the next 10 minutes or so, or 5 or 10 minutes. So folks, follow along with me. I'm going to share my screen. And all right, you should see now our Attleboro Wealth Management website. Just raise your hand for me if, in fact, that's what you see. Thank you. Thanks, Dave. So over here in what is the slot corner, you click into there, and there's information about Ed Slot. There's me and Ed. There's a video that Ed did for me. There's some information here, but down here is some really great information that you can use, and you can just go to the website and grab it, or you might want to do this, because as I said, this 2021 chart is going away in the next week or so. You can download it. You can click in there. All you got to do is enter your email address, and you can download it. Here is the 2021 Medicare income planning. Now, let me just jump back up here for a second. Here's what we're talking about as far as the tax rates: married, filing jointly, and single. So we talked about that suddenly single. Here is the capital gains rates. And don't let capital gains fool you either, because you can pay 0% capital gains, 15 or 20, but many people forget about this 3.8% Medicare surtax. So if you're averaging, like, a lot of people pay 15% capital gains, but many people over $250,000 for joint filers or $200,000 for single filers, you pay another 3.8%. So now you're at 18.8. That's pretty close to the ordinary income. So you can download that and use it for your tax preparation or tax planning, this is Medicare, right? So for 2021, these are the IRMA rates that Diane were just talking about. And look at that. It can go as high, right, as $504 each, right? So that's one individual. So a lot of people land in this area here, $297, $148. That seems to be really common in those areas. Listen, there's also a lot of folks that when we're trailing off the end of Roth conversions, and we had people graduate this past year, Dave, where they finished up the Roth conversions. That's always exciting. But when you get to the end, sometimes you can just float right below this IRMA, which is really nice too, right? And some people even in the beginning. But here's the retirement plan contributions we talked about, Roth IRAs, 401ks, so you can download that. Here's another thing for net investment income and HSAs. I'm almost done. And here is 2021's uniform lifetime table. This is what RMDs are based off of. There's a new one this year, right? So they've redone the tables. They're probably going to have to do it again pretty quickly because actuarial tables have changed because of COVID. But you can download all these things straight from the website. So I'm going to stop sharing that. Dave, can we talk about your books?
I suppose.
So first of all, anybody who schedules an appointment with me over the next 4 days just from this webinar, I've got a stack full of books that I'm going to share with you. So I'm going to send you Power of Xero. I have Look Before You LERP, and I have Tax-Free Income for Life. Thank you very much. Dave, I don't know. I wish I had them in my hand. I don't know if I told you this, but you were very kind when you first published Tax-Free Income for Life. I have a blurb in there supporting the book because I think it's great, and you sent me a signed copy. And do you know I accidentally sent that to somebody? So I apologize for that. But one of these days when I come to see you and your lovely wife, I might just bring a copy and have you sign another one.
Or when I come to see you in April.
Oh yeah, that's a better idea. Yeah. Okay, so Dave, he's best-selling author, but he has. I'm going to just leave the floor to him to talk about his books and his new book coming out because I can't wait to read it. Go ahead, Dave.
Am I talking about all four or just the?
Whatever you'd like.
Okay. Well, really, the Power of Xero is the one that started it all. I wrote that back in 2013. Basically, that book is designed to, number one, convince you that tax rates in the future are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today, educates you on the three basic types of money, the three basic types of buckets, how in a rising tax rate environment, there's a mathematically perfect amount of money to have in your taxable and tax deferred buckets. And then anything above and beyond those ideal amounts should be systematically repositioned and tax-free. We make the case that 0% tax bracket's a really big deal because if tax rates double, like a lot of experts predict, 2 times 0 is still 0. I then wrote a book called Look Before You LERP, which is a play on the phrase look before you leap, which is what we say before someone gets married. And I basically say, hey, look, when you use an LIRP as part of your comprehensive strategy to get to the 0% tax bracket, not all LIRPs are created equal, and that hey, when you were thinking about getting married, you probably had a laundry list of attributes you were looking for in a spouse. Maybe you were attracted to them, maybe you were same religion, maybe you're going in the same direction, same values, those types of things. When you are thinking about entering into the LIRP contract, you should have a list of 7 or 8 things on your laundry list that you're looking for in an LIRP, because LIRPs only really work if it's till death do you part. And in some cases, they're 40, 50-year propositions. You want to make sure that your LIRP has every single one of those attributes that I list in my book, Look Before You LERP. So that's sort of a guide on selecting an LIRP mate, as it were. And then I wrote a book called The Volatility Shield, sort of a heartwarming story about how to eliminate various risks from your retirement. And then the one that I wrote most recently, Tax-Free Income for Life, makes the case that the single greatest risk, according to retirees and pre-retirees, in your retirement is, much to my chagrin, it's not, hey, tax rate risk. It's the risk of running out of money before you run out of life. And so I make the case that there's a couple of different ways to purge longevity risk, which is what we call it, the risk of living too long, outliving your money. There's a couple of different ways to purge longevity risk from your retirement portfolio. I make the case that one of the mathematically most efficient ways is to use what we call a guaranteed lifetime income, which basically says, hey, as long as you're on this side of the grass, you basically hand a chunk of your liquid retirement savings to an insurance company, and they give you in exchange a guaranteed, a promise that you'll receive a stream of income every day until you die. The problem is, historically, most advisors situate those annuities within the tax-deferred bucket, which exposes them to two risks: expose them to tax rate risk and the risk of Social Security taxation. I make the case that there are certain types of annuities that have what's called a piecemeal internal Roth conversion, which allows you to do a Roth conversion on that annuity, so that by the time that Roth conversion is complete, you can pull money out of that annuity 100% tax-free, and it dramatically increases the likelihood that you'll get your Social Security tax-free as long as you're alive as well. So that's how you can eliminate tax rate risk and longevity risk within the very same financial plan. It sort of rounds out the entire Power of Xero worldview. And then I got a new book coming out in the next couple months. It's called The Infinity Code. It's a 75,000 word novel. It's got some financial undertones. It's about a shadowy cabal of Harvard graduates that graduated in 1985 who are planning to sort of institute a new world order in the United States by radically redefining the US monetary system. And I talk about a Harvard sophomore who unwittingly becomes aware of their plot and has to, in a race against the clock, has to foil their plan before their plan, goes past the point of no return. So it's a really exciting Dan Brown sort of suspense thriller with a very important monetary theme that is incredibly relevant, and it's almost ripped right from the headlines, incredibly relevant to our current plight. And so that'll come out in the next couple of months, and hopefully be a good change of pace from the business books that I typically write.
That's exciting. So will that be published by the time we see you in April? Your new book, do you think?
Yeah, this is the interesting part. I have to convince my literary agent that I'm good at writing novels, not just at writing business books. So I'm in the process of trying to convince him to shop it around to some of Penguin Random House type publishers. If not, I might have to find a smaller publisher. That may take a little bit of time, but it's just sorting that part out that'll take some time. So no promises, but certainly if it is done by then, we'll have some copies on hand.
That'd be great. That'd be exciting. Okay. Well, Dave, I appreciate the time. It's been wonderful as always. Let's not wait another year to do this. So we'll set up the time to do it. Someone had asked if this this webinar is going to be released on a recording. It'll be available on that same website I showed you, attleborowealth.com. There is a drop down for my weekly and my special webinars. It'll be under the special webinars, so you can access it there. That will take a few days to get that done. It's got to go through the compliance screening and all that stuff. But Dave, I hope it stays warm in Puerto Rico for you, and I hope we catch some of that weather soon.
Fingers crossed.
And I'm really looking forward to seeing you in the spring. And again, I appreciate the time. Thanks, everybody. Don't forget, when you log out, you should see my calendar. I'm giving you 4 days of my time. So I think that's valuable. I hope you do too. And I hope to see you all soon. Thanks, Dave. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mark.
Right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.